Hey, everybody. My name is Carl Kaiser. I'm a digital marketing specialist here at Integris. Thanks for being here today. We're going to be starting soon. Before we do, I want to talk a little bit about how the session is going to proceed. Number one, we encourage you to ask questions, but we're not going to be answering them until the end of the webinar. Just enter them into the chat, and we're going to share them with the presenters when appropriate. Number two, we're going to be asking you a few questions during the event. Those will appear in the sidebar as polls. We'd really appreciate your feedback on these. They help us understand our audience better. Number three, a copy of the slide deck is available for download under handouts. A copy of the presentation video will be emailed out to you after we finish up. Again, thank you for being here. I'm going to hand things off to Anthony now.
Hey everybody, I'm Anthony DeGraw, Chief Revenue Officer at Integris. We are going to get started here in a moment or two. I'm even going to test out this chat function here, see if we can get it going. Let me see what I can do. Cool. This is my first time with this platform, so we're going to give it a go. I'm already liking the functionality a little bit better than some of the other platforms we've used in the past. So if you don't mind, if you're jumping in, and you can expand that chat on the right-hand side of your screen there. There we go. We got Kyle Murphy. Throw a couple chats in there. Throw some GIFs in there. Give us some creativity as we wait for some of these other folks to join us. There we go. So as we were all preparing for this, my ability to not cough for this entire thing may be extremely limited. So I am going to be juggling the mute function, so you guys don't have to hear that the entire time. Give it another minute or two, maybe 103 Eastern, 104 Eastern, we'll kick it off. I have two other handsome gentlemen with me today that you should be able to see on your screen. One is supposedly going to play that instrument in the back of his screen there, but we may save that for another time. We don't know. Awesome. No coughing allowed. We're getting some hands. Anita's here. Joel. Oh, there we go. Somebody always does it, Charles. Joel has asked for Freebird.
The extended version?
There's always a Joel in the group. Awesome. Just it's 103 Eastern now. We'll give it about one more minute. Can't see the level of participants, but we'll give it one more minute. $75 here. All right, that's cool. Thank you, marketing. We got marketing and some operators in the background helping us manage this. As Carl had mentioned, if you have any questions or whatnot, you can drop them in the chat. We will be doing some polls, so we're looking for some engagement there, see if we can make this fun. With that being said, welcome to the launch of Integris and Security7 coming together. First off, happy holidays. It right now is December 7th. We're in the final month of the year. The holidays are around us. I hope everyone's doing well and can finish out the year strong. With that being said, we're going to get into the topic of today. So this is the MSP meets MSSP. We love our acronyms and S's. The future of cybersecurity as a managed service. So I'll go to the next slide here. Here's our agenda. So we're going to do some quick introductions. Then we're going to go over the background of who is Integris and who is Security7 Networks. Finally, we're going to come together and say, how did we come together and why did we join forces? Then we're going to flip it over and talk a little bit about what's the difference between an MSP and an MSSP, if there is any at all. Finally, we're going to switch over to Charles, who's our special guest from outside the actual service provider, like day-to-day industry, and he actually runs an organization called the MSPAlliance. And he's going to talk to all of us about the future of managed service providers and cybersecurity from the seat that he sits in. And finally, we'll handle any of those questions and answers. I know Carl mentioned that we probably won't answer questions throughout, but I will be looking at the chat. And if something's pertinent to what we're talking about, I'll try and get it in there for you. All right, first off, I'm Anthony DeGraw, the Chief Revenue Officer at Integris. I've been with an Integris for about 6 years now. I started with a small company out of New Jersey called Domain Computer Services, which was also an MSP provider. We went on a crazy road over the last 2 years to bring together the best-in-class providers in the MSP community. We primarily did that through our peer group of companies led by IT Nation Evolve, as well as SLI, which are some industry-leading groups out there that keep best-in-class metrics, and we compare ourselves to those. Through those relationships, we came across Security7. So with that, I'm going to switch over to Jay, and you can introduce yourself real quick, Jay, and Security7.
Thanks, Anthony. I'm Jay Smith, formerly the president of sales of Security7 Networks, and over the last 3 months now, a newly minted VP of sales at Integris. Predominantly focused up here in the Northeast, and very much looking forward to the integrations that we're going through to become part of a bigger organization. Charles?
Yeah. Charles Weaver, co-founder of the MSPAlliance. We've been around for 22 years. As Anthony mentioned, we're not a managed service provider, but we are an advocacy group and a public policy community of MSPs. We've got about 30,000 MSP members worldwide, and chiefly what we do day to day is work on public policy, standards, best practices, and trying to promote the cause of managed IT services worldwide. So that's about what we do.
Awesome. Thank you both, gentlemen. And I like to call Charles, he holds our industry accountable. And I absolutely love that. All right, quick little background on Integris. So Integris is a national MSP, as you can see on the map here. We cover 3 different time zones. We currently have over 600 employees across 10 different states and 19 locations. So we have a large exposure now. We see all different types of businesses, and we get brought into some unique use cases on how we can engage with our different customers. Primarily, we're looking to deliver a premium managed services offering across SMBs in some specific niches like professional services, manufacturing, nonprofits, and financial services industries. Our goal is to be a strategic advisor with our clients so they can be more productive with their technology, deliver better results to their customers, and then grow their business overall. So with that, we're going to do our first poll of the day and say how many here are currently engaged with an MSP. So we're getting quick answers here. This is like watching the lottery system. All right, we're upwards of 40 answers. Cool. So marketing, I'll let you in the background decide on when you want to cut it off, and we can share those results with the team. It looks like right now about 45 are engaged with an MSP and about 3 that are not. So a lot of MSPs in the audience for Jay and Charles as we start to understand the audience that's here today. Great. We'll go to the next slide.
Great. A little bit of a backgrounder on Security7 Networks. So predominantly up in the New England space, just outside of Boston, a markedly smaller organization with 14 professionals, but very focused in the network management space, as well as in the security management space. So I'd like to consider us more of a security boutique organization where we bring the combination of products, process, and people and services into our client base. Most of our clients seem to be in a regulated industry, whether it's healthcare, financial services, some kind of GRC, government regulation and compliance space. From a set of services that we provide, expanded into like vulnerability assessment services, multi-factor authentication, single sign-on, virtual CISO, Chief Information Security Officer space. And we find ourselves focusing more on the small and medium enterprise client, and that client usually has internal IT staff, but they have a lacking of something, whether it's the time, the knowledge, 7x24, eyes on glass, that they're lacking something, which makes the partnership really, focus in really well. So that brings us up into our next poll question, very similar, about how many here are currently engaged with an MSSP?
Expect this to be a little bit different.
As that's continuing to tabulate, I will give you a little bit of a cheat here. I think part of our thesis going into this webinar is that the differences between an MSP and an MSSP in today's climate, that line that used to be very, very exacting is not even gray anymore. It's actually been, from I think the 3 of ours position, that it's been abolished. You can't be an MSP in today's space without having great security chops. And it's very challenging to be an MSSP without offering MSP services. That same client is appealing for both sets of services. So, we feel pretty strongly that there is no more line of a managed security service provider or a MSSP. You can't be one or the other. You have to be both.
Yeah, and to follow up on that, when I first got into the MSP industry, I was always super confused on what is an MSSP and why do I keep hearing this? Because a lot of the solutions we were delivering or including or educating on as part of our go-to-market strategy. There were some defined blocks that we definitely did not do and would pass the buck on, but I always was trying to figure that out and was confused myself. Final result of the poll is about 19 folks not engaged with an MSSP and about 16 engaged with an MSSP. Great. Thank you for that information. So we wanted to quickly go through why did Integris and Security7 come together? And I was going to start here. I have 3 main bullet points that I wanted to walk everybody through on why did Integris join forces with Security7. Number 1 was the people. We are a people business. And the first thing that we look at whenever we're looking to join partners with anybody, a vendor, another organization, is their people. So right off the top, and I'm not going to be able to name all the names, but Jay, Brian, Ray, Darren, Shannon, Cheryl, Coral, the entire team, the expertise that these folks had, the relationships that they had with their vendors, with their customers, and the reputation that they just had in the marketplace of me getting direct messages on LinkedIn about these folks was off the charts. So that's where we started, was these people were outstanding folks. I've had the pleasure of working with Jay for about 3 months now, and that is proven out even after we've joined forces together. So number 1, why did Integris join forces with Security7? Was their people, their reputation, and their expertise. Number 2, I think it's the Gretzky quote of like, skate to where the puck is going. And in every single conversation, in the marketing, in reading the research on the industries, number 1, we're going to cybersecurity, we're going to compliance, regulations are coming faster than ever. We got breaches and incident response plans. MDR, SIEM, XDR, where is this industry going? And it's clear as day that you better have the people to back up that exact answer. And Security7 did that for Integris. And then number 3 was obviously, what are we currently getting requested from our clients? And our clients are doubling and tripling down. And we like to talk about, what clients do we want to have? Where are we trying to go with our client base? Who are we trying to partner up with? And the answer there is always operationally mature organizations as who we want to partner with. And operationally mature organizations are looking for these exact things. Compliance is top of mind, regulations, vCISO, all of these things, they're looking to get better. They want answers from us on how to improve their organizations. So those were the top 3 reasons on the Integris side of why we chose to partner with Security7 going forward.
Yep. And from the Security7 perspective, I think there's some level of similarities and some level of differences there, right? So right off the bat, when we were introduced to Rashad, he said, "Hi, my name is Rashad, the CEO of Integris, and I'm in the people business." So, there's a pretty significant level of similarity there. And as we started to tease out our conversations a little bit in more detail, we had come to one of the questions they asked is our employee churn. And our response to that employee churn is, we don't know what it's like to have an employee tender a resignation despite being in business for 20 years. So the people that work here were very important to us and that we were going to land in a good spot. There's a level of similarity there. From a size perspective, what we found is that our clients are expecting more from us. And they're not just expecting more from us, they really need more from us. And when we start to focus in on that client, where we're doing half of the solution as the MSSP, we're going to get into some technology kind of conversations, Anthony and I, in an upcoming slides. And we didn't do certain things that our customers required. And what we found is that, we needed a deeper set of good people, but we also needed a broader set of services as well. With the size that Integris is, it's 600 plus employees, there's also a lot better geographic reach. So knowing that we deal with distributed enterprise networks pretty significantly, we now will have feet on the street in some of the local communities where our existing customers have people in offices. So I think that was something else that was very important to us. And the other thing that we found was it's a very challenging environment to get good people, security professionals in particular. You can't have enough good security professionals, IT in general, I think security in particular. There's millions of unsatisfied security jobs right now. And by combining forces, we can start to get some economies of scale between our service desks. Those were some of the reasons why we felt as though it was better to come together.
Awesome. So the next one here that we're going to talk about is Jay and I wanted to kind of break down, and please, Charles, add in anything that you got in between here. I know we're going to get to you as the kind of the heavy hitter at the end here, but if there's anything you want to add in, please do. Jay and I wanted to break down, just like I mentioned, MSP, MSSP was confusing for me. I'm sure it's confusing for a lot of the Integris customers that may be here, the 7 customers that may be here. So what are some of the differences? So number one was patch management and vulnerability assessments. So I'll hit it from the MSP side, and Jay's going to flip the script and hit it from the MSSP side. So number one was patch management. So like the lifeblood of what an MSP does at its core is manage your systems and patch them. So this could be at the operating level, it could be at the application level, but we like to call it at Integris free security, right? You have these operating systems, these applications, Java, Adobe, whatnot, that are constantly running. They're constantly releasing patches. They need to be tested, they need to be deployed, and they need to be managed on a monthly basis, bi-monthly basis, and sometimes in an emergency basis. A really good MSP is going to deliver that type of solution for you on a consistent basis and be able to back it up with reporting and documentation. So that's how we think about it on the MSP side. And now Jay will take it to the next level for his side.
Now, thanks, Anthony. So, I think this is a yin and a yang, right? So patch management and vulnerability assessment is that check and balance to each other, right? So if patches, which is a very, very high vector of getting a threat, if the patches aren't deployed, then, bad actors can come in and actually, breach your system. Well, the vulnerability assessment is going to check the patching efficacy that's going on into systems. So it's going to hit systems, it's going to hit routers, firewalls, switches, and the like. And there's a perspective difference between vulnerability assessments, which takes some requirement to tease out a little bit. So I think most people think of a vulnerability assessment as an external context where somebody is having a probe trying to come into somebody's organization and test what they can see and whether things are patched or not. But that's really only 1/3 from our perspective, 1/3 of what that landscape looks like. So oftentimes, one of the vectors that somebody can come in is through email, and they're going to send a link. Somebody's going to click on a link, despite all the security awareness training that you send to your employees. They're going to click the link anyway, and they're going to be infected. Well, most folks typically think of security as exterior, right? I've got a perimeter where I've got a firewall that's up to date and up to snuff. And then I've got an internal side that's all ooey and gooey. So hard exterior, ooey gooey on the inside. So some of the vulnerability assessments will actually look at what the internal landscape looks like, right? So now you've got this inside to inside, you've got this outside to inside. And then, the third way that people will look at this is from a cloud perspective. And now we're mostly in a remote situation or a hybrid situation. So you've got to look at the devices that are not necessarily on the inside of your network anymore, right? But they could be through a virtual private connection. So there's some technologies that we've leveraged that look at it from a cloud perspective. And by scanning all of those places from all of those different perspectives, it gives you a pretty good idea of what your patch management efficacy looks like by this check and balance.
Absolutely. Yeah, if there's any questions specifically on either of these, please hit them in the chat and Jay and I will get to them. Charles, any thoughts on that, or we'll keep it rolling?
Well, no, just a quick comment that, what you and Jay are mentioning is the very evolution of the MSP model to evolve and become adapted to the threats that are presenting to their customers and to literally stand in front of those customers and help protect them. There's a lot of consultants out there. There's a lot of people who may know a little bit about this topic. They may be able to advise, but they don't actually do the work like you guys do. And that's a very big distinction that we see. And yeah, this is plenty of work to go around, to say the least.
All right, our next one, antivirus versus managed detection and response. So when I joined the industry, it was your standard definition-based antivirus, which was also sometimes called an EPP or an endpoint protection. Then it quickly switched over to the next generation antivirus, which we in the IT or the IT vendor space love to throw the term next generation in front of a lot of different things to make it sound cool and sexy. So the next generation viruses started to be called EDRs or endpoint detection and response, and they became more behavior based. So I can get into the definition versus behavior based antiviruses. But then you had the continued progression of that into managed detection and response. And now you even have XDR. I'm going to let Jay hit on the MDR and XDR thought process there, but I'll quickly touch on the antivirus. So standard solution that you're going to put on your endpoint. Obviously, Jay mentioned the hybrid nature of today's work or the full remote. That endpoint, your laptop, your desktop, your tablet out in the field is now becoming one of the most critical vectors. You're not protected all the time behind a managed firewall in a corporate office that your IT team could lock down. Now we're out, probably all three of us are on home networks right now with personal internet addresses and things like that. So protecting that endpoint or how you're accessing your company's system and data and resources obviously is the most important. So that antivirus has evolved. One of the main reasons it evolved, or what I like to talk through, is that definition based, meaning the antivirus was only going to be able to detect code that the provider, the vendor had put into the system to detect based off of different definitions that they had learned about. Obviously, with a patch, that thing continues to update and stay with the trends. What ended up happening in the threat vectors or threat actors is that they were able to manipulate the code so quick and so fast and put so many different versions of it out there that the traditional definition-based antivirus platforms couldn't keep up with them. There's just no way for them to stay there. So what they all started to switch to do is use AI and machine learning as some marketing terms, but they went to more of a behavior-based model where they know Anthony logs onto his computer approximately this time every single day. He opens this many tabs. This is the systems he goes to. This is how much he downloads. This is how much he uploads. It starts to watch my behavior, and it now has a profile of who Anthony is and what he does every single day. Now, when all of a sudden I do something random or start downloading a lot of files or start to try and get access to random things, now it can lock me off from the corporate network, disconnect me from the internet, and notify my team of like, hey, something weird is going on here. So it doesn't necessarily stop every single thing, but it allows that alert, that break from the network to then be able to notify whether it be an MSP, an MSSP, or an IT team to, hey, something weird is going on that Anthony doesn't typically do. So that's been the evolution on the antivirus side. Extremely important piece of a layered approach on your endpoints, but now that's even gone further. So Jay, why don't you touch on the MDR and even potentially XDR that's now being talked about?
Sure. I think you actually hit it pretty good. I'll maybe just fill in a little bit of the blank, but as Anthony had said, antivirus usually started as that virus definition, the ability of virus writers to morph very quickly, made it always that there was a patient zero, right? Somebody always had to get the virus first. That had to get reported back into the antivirus vendor, and then they would have to come up with yet a new definition. So you're always chasing your tail, and when the tail chase is really quick, your ability to prevent the virus is, almost impossible. So you entered these EPP vendors, the error detection and response, and then a variant called managed detection and response was pretty much a service provider managing the same error detection response licensing, and then extending into this XDR services. And the one place where I think Anthony touched upon that I'll maybe spend a little bit more time with is this is going from an automatic basis now, right? So before, when you're trying to do these things manually, you're too slow. But what the MDR platforms will do is automatically quarantine folks that they can't remediate. So that's part of it. The other element that comes into it is then the human part of it. So whatever the product can't do automatically, then goes off into active threat hunters, right? And these are going to go across multiple systems. In these MDR products, get you the visibility on, is this going via a protocol? Is it going just to a user that's trying to be exploited? Is it trying to go to all users that have a certain application? It gets you that visibility to let you hone in on on where you're going to focus your efforts to try to prevent the breach. The other thing, and the final thing that I'll mention, is the whole element, or one of the primary elements of what security professionals try to do, is reduce the time that there's something lurking in the network from, I think the average days are probably 300 days or thereabouts, 290 days from the initial inception of somebody trying to come into your network to actually getting to notification and starting to remediate. So products like this reduce that time significantly, either down to seconds, maybe hours or days. So you're trying to really reduce the amount of time that somebody's going to be lurking in your network.
Perfect. Charles, any feedback on that one?
Maybe just a quick comment on the nature, the fundamental difference between AV, antivirus, and these MDR, XDR types of technologies, which is the antivirus of 20 years ago allowed a lot of people to deploy antivirus out to customers. So a garden variety, let's say a general practitioner MSP, would be able to do that and not have to know a lot about security. The new technology, I think, demands a little bit more understanding, probably a lot more. Jay would probably say it's a lot more expertise and knowledge about how to use the technology effectively to protect customers. And I think that's a very important distinction, is that as that continues to evolve, the technology, so must the MSSP and their expertise.
Absolutely. I want to acknowledge a question in the chat that I do want to wait a little bit more towards the end to answer, because I think there'll be a really good conversation around it. But Barbara did ask if the MSP is doing the vulnerability assessment of their own managed services, isn't that a conflict of interest? And I think there's multiple different ways to answer that. And I want to give you that full flushed out answer, because we can go in a couple different directions with that one. But great question, Barbara. Wanted to acknowledge it. And then also we will make sure we answer that at the end here. All right, to keep it moving, backup and disaster recovery versus ransomware. So your traditional MSP is going to put into place a backup and a disaster recovery platforms. We like to come to market and say, we want you to hold us fully accountable for your backups and your disaster recovery solution. We even go the step further and say, we want a seat at the table with your executive team or with your IT team to fully define and adhere to a recovery time objective, an RTO, and a recovery point objective, an RPO. A lot of the organizations that we go in and assess, they've never done that. It's, what do you do backups? Yeah, once a day. Have you ever tested a backup? I don't think so. Have you ever tried to restore from a backup? No, why would we do that? Well, we don't want to wait for what else is on this stream, which is ransomware. So a really good MSP is going to sit down with you. They're going to explain to you what your options are on backup and disaster recovery. They're going to walk you through what recovery time objective means, what recovery point objective means, where you are at your current state, where they can get you to with their current solution or a standard solution, and then give you the examples or other options if that doesn't match your needs. So we have some financial services companies that can't go down for a second and can't lose a second worth of data. They have completely different solutions in place than a chiropractor's office or a service-based business office. They all rely on technology and data and systems completely differently. Even coming down to the different applications, right? Your phone system may be a different RTO and RPO versus your financial system based on the business's needs. So we specifically walk you through that, manage it, maintain it, test it, restore from it, and have defined RTO and RPO results. Jay, switch it over to you on the ransomware conversation.
Sure. So, when I think of backup and disaster recovery from an MSP perspective, it's usually that somebody's dropped a file that they need to recover, the building burned, or there was some kind of physical issue with the location, and I need to recover wholeheartedly, or I need to even move people to a different location, to their homes or to some other kind of hoteling situation. From a ransomware perspective, though, it's become a very important tool in kind of that last gasp if you can't recover from ransomware. So what we've seen is, for people who've got a really great backup and disaster recovery, at least they can restore. And there's multiple elements of that restoration that have to occur. First is you've got to have the personnel in place and able to handle that restoration. We've seen some organizations kind of get crippled into their knees on trying to spend the manpower to put a backup back together that wasn't really well formulated, right? So it takes a lot of time. When that's going on and systems are encrypted, your staff is going to be really, really, really tired. We've seen some organizations working pretty much day and night for multiple weeks at a time. Sometimes you're bringing in third parties to help augment the staff. But really, again, from the ransomware perspective, if you don't have a great disaster recovery plan, it's going to be really challenging. And you'll have two choices. Choice number one is pay the threat actor the ransom, because you can't recover the data. Some cases, there's some legislation, actually some laws against paying certain types of threat actors if they show up on certain lists. Essentially, you're fueling crime. And then the second choice is, if you can't get the data, you go out of business, right? So there's not a lot of great choice. There is a permeation that we've seen that started to come forward with some of the threat actors, where not only do they encrypt your systems so that if you can recover, because they've got a great backup and disaster recovery solution, they'll start to expose your data. So that's something else that started to come out, where the backup and disaster recovery solution can't really fix that. But there's a common saying with security called defense in depth, right? And when you use defense in depth strategies, like maybe having a firewall properly configured to not allow exfiltration to go in place, maybe using data leak prevention technologies, using MDR, right? So that they're going to avoid certain kinds of tunneling aspects, DNS tunneling or HTTPS, to bypass firewall rules. You can try to mitigate, or you can mitigate the exfiltration part of the exploit, as well as still recover the data so that you don't have to pay the ransom.
Charles, what have you seen across the industry on this?
Yeah, this is an important and a very complicated issue. This could fill up several hours of our discussion, no doubt. But what I would say is, yeah, I largely agree with Jay that it is much better to plan for, I'm not saying expect to get breached, but the odds are, even with the best, even the federal government that has all the endless technology, people, and money, they get breached, right? If someone wants to get in, I think that's an undeniable reality. What you need, and a good MSSP will help you do this, is get prepared to plan for the defense and plan for, if it happens, this is what we're going to do to get you back up and running as quickly as possible. I would like to say that the days of the ransomware bad actors getting paid are fewer and fewer until it actually stops. Because I think once that economic well has been dried up for them, they'll shift tactics. They won't go away, but they'll shift and do something else. But it's a touchy subject. I don't want to go on too much about it, but plan for recovery. That's my best advice.
Absolutely. And luckily the price of Bitcoin is in the tank right now. So that may be helping us a little bit. All right, next slide. Expansion of vCIO and vCISO. So virtual chief information officer, also sometimes called a fractional chief information officer, and your virtual chief information security officer, also sometimes referred to as fractional. So the lifeblood of our premium managed service provider is what we call a CIO. And the way I like to explain this to the organizations that are considering choosing Integris as an MSP provider is that in our world, a vCIO is a senior technical engineer that also has the business acumen to sit at an executive table and strategically plan out the use, budget, and strategy of their technology environment. How is it better going to serve their employees? How is it better going to serve their customers? And how are they going to be able to scale and grow or get more efficient from that? So that's the lifeblood in our organization, is that CIO who owns the entire relationship, has strategic, you could call them strategic business reviews or strategic technology reviews on a bi-weekly, monthly, quarterly basis, semi-annual basis, to make sure that we are not only saying what we are going to do, and we take an approach where we look back a quarter and we look forward a quarter, and constantly planning, just as if they were a part of your team, just as if you had hired them to come onto your organization and lead the technology strategy and make it work efficiently for the organization. So that's the lifeblood of our offering, and filling those roles and making sure those are the right people is the most important thing for us. And then what we saw, and I'll pass the buck to Jay here, is all of a sudden you have these regulations coming down. You have these insurance applications coming down the pipe. You have some larger clients that your client engages with that get vendor risk questionnaires or vendor risk assessments. And that need, that load has significantly increased prior to the pandemic. Took a little bit of heat off during the pandemic. Obviously, we're focused elsewhere, but that heat is now picking up very strong again. So that load, whether it's a current CIO or a virtual CIO, they're handling that. And their highest and best use, a concept we have at Integris, which we shorten to HABU, highest and best use, is to lead that strategy, budgeting, and planning for your technology. Some of them may have the skill set, some of them may not, to get into the compliance, the vendor risk assessments, the regulations that you have to adhere to, or any of these frameworks that are now out there that you want to comply with. It's two different brains, and we got to acknowledge that and really draw a line in the sand of who's doing what and who's an expert in what. So Jay, I'll flip that over to you on the CISO side and what you're seeing
Sure.
there.
So to round out a little bit of that, Anthony, we see that the primary role of the CISO is to measure the risk, look at the gaps, and then prioritize the actions, right? Those are probably the predominant roles of the CISO. I think I mentioned earlier that there's a real pretty strong run on security professionals. The gold standard in the security professional space is the CISSP. Organizations that we typically handle at the size that they are, they can't handle that CISSP salary because they don't have a full-time need, but they have a need, but it's a part-time need for a high-end person. So that fractional element, that virtual element of it, something that really works well. I think the thing that you mentioned, Anthony, was supply chain, right? So our clients have very large clients that large client of our client forces their security requirements down to our client, which is much smaller, can't afford that gold standard CISSP. So what the tip of the iceberg is there is when you start to see those increasing frequency of security questionnaires coming from your cyber liability company and or multiple clients. The only way to get ahead of that, and I'll speak to it from even a personal perspective, is that you have to go off and get yourself audited, right? You have to adopt a framework. Some of those are going to be picked for you because of the vertical industry you're in. Think of PCI, in the retail space, or HIPAA in the healthcare space. But there's a few others, right? ISO 27001, SOC 2. There's some privacy standards in the state space that you'll see, some of it in the federal space. And the other role of a CISO is to help match our clients' requirements with the best framework, right? So sometimes there's a preconceived notion with some of our clients that they want to immediately knee-jerk to get a SOC 2, or I have GDPR. I've got all these other, acronyms of alphabet soup. I think the other role of that CISO is to really help match the framework that is available to the client's business requirement. And the CISO can go through a very stepwise approach on which framework makes most sense, and then write the policies, help with the procedures, and getting ready for audit prep, right? So we as an organization don't do the audit ourselves, but we'll help our clients get ready for a third-party organization to come in and to do that certification.
Perfect. Charles, any thoughts on that one?
Only quickly that these are not IT skill sets, right? If you have an internal IT person or even a small department, the vCIO and vCISO are dramatically different skill sets and different areas of expertise that are not found commonly in most organizations, but they're incredibly important.
Yeah. To back that up, we have a lot of CIOs or IT managers coming to us, raising their hand and saying, I do not want to sign off or do anything related to this. And that is clear example of they really want to define their box and just play in their box, because they do not want to get held on to the implications of making the wrong decision or going down the wrong roadmap. Or to Charles' point, I don't have that skill set. It is a different skill set. Literally, when you talk to one or the other, you can see the difference in personalities between the two. Cool. All right. Last poll here. Do you purchase, or actually, Jay, you wanted to handle this one because you had a little story.
A little bit of a story. Let's hope that I get the story right, Anthony. Okay, you can correct me where I go astray. But I'm a pretty good fan of a book called Left of Bang. Right, and before you start to answer the poll, just hear the story out. Give me 2 or 3 minutes if you don't mind. So in this Left of Bang, it's really a military book, not unlike The Art of War that has been applied to business situations. This Left of Bang, a little bit more modern, done through some of the Iraqi conflicts. And what it really did is, if you look at the timeline from left to right, where left is the beginning of time and right is the end of time, and right in the middle of it is this big bang. And when you look at the left side of it, you're in a proactive situation where you can do all of the testing, you can put in multi-factor authentication products, you can do all of the controls that you need to do. You can train your people how to communicate. You can get involved in incident response planning and those types of activities. Bang is when something bad happens, right? So you're trying to stay left of bang when you're in this proactive situation. So bang could be that 9 o'clock call on a Friday night before a long weekend where your users are starting to report blue screens that say your disks have been encrypted and here's a phone number and some contact information. That's a pretty good bang. Bang could be your finance manager saying, hey, we just wired a couple $100,000 to one of our vendors and they're claiming they didn't get it, but we have an invoice with some routing information that came from them. Business email compromise. That's a pretty good bang, right? So you can feel the knot in the pit of the stomach starting to develop as I keep talking, right? It could be the administrative assistant that got an email from the CEO about getting gift cards, right? That's another pretty good bang situation. And there's a lot of different kinds of information security bangs. Now, on the right side is when you don't have the time to do any of the planning. That's when the incident response is happening. This is where your preparation is gone. And that's when the incident is starting to actually unfold. You're calling your cyber liability company. They're getting plane tickets. They're showing up on your sites. You're informing, or you're trying to inform state agencies, your employees, because social security numbers might have been compromised. Their bank accounts might have been compromised. And what we're curious from a product line development standpoint as a service provider is, do you really purchase these products? Do you think of purchasing them proactively, before bang, or do you think of purchasing them post bang, right? Because our product line would really be different. We'd have a team of people waiting around on a Friday night before a long weekend with JetBlue or American Airlines, on their browser getting ready to be deployed. Or do we focus on the security awareness training and the CISO services and mapping frameworks and trying to improve security posture? So I'll give a minute now that I've been speaking for a little bit, but if you could try to answer that poll with that kind of context in mind, we would greatly appreciate the answer to this question.
Awesome. It looks like we keep going back and forth, about 80% proactively and about 20% reactively. So holding that line right between about 80 to 85% proactive and about 15 to 20% reactive. Awesome. Well, thank you all for that information. And without further ado, Jay's going to introduce or give a little story behind Charles and why he's here today.
Yeah, I'm going to leave the stories, at bay for fear of turning Charles's face red on this video session. But, all kidding aside, we've leveraged the services of the MSPAlliance as Security7 for years. I think we're probably 8 or 10 years deep now. We started with our SSA 16 certification way back, and that's, kind of progressed into SOC 1, SOC 2s, MSP Cloud Verify standards. And what that's done for us is it's really allowed us to get ahead of those security questionnaires, and it's made us forward thinking. We've participated with MSP Worlds, which Charles has hosted, which again is down the thought leadership, security thought leadership, and really helping us steer where our product line is going to go based upon where the industry directions are to make sure that we're always ahead of it. So without further ado, and with Charles's face still not red, I'll pass it over to him.
Well, thank you for those kind words, Jay. And on a personal note, to reciprocate, it was, we've been working with your organization for a very long time and very happy, beyond pleased that you have found a great partner in Integris and that you guys are combining to become an even bigger, better organization. So very happy for both sides of that family. The future, I don't want to repeat things that have already been talked about by Anthony and Jay, but just to put a broader perspective on this, we sit in a unique position because we see MSPs and their customers at a higher level. And so, we don't get as close to the stuff as Jay and Anthony do, but we see a pretty broad spectrum of the whole MSP community globally. And so we part of our job is to determine large movements and to determine what's happening and why are things happening. And I would say that you've heard a lot about antivirus to MDR. You've talked about virtual CIO, virtual CISO types of services, preparing for ransomware, being prepared to recover quickly from ransomware and other security types of events. 20 years ago, that would have been a very boutique MSP. Today, that's almost what table stakes for every MSP out there. I'll say not every MSP out there can do that really successfully. It takes a really special, committed MSSP organization who knows what they're doing, has great people who are trained, who are experienced, and they have the experience with their customers to be able to advise and actually do the work that protects and makes those customers less at risk, or put differently, more capable of recovering from a bang event, as Jay put it, which is not something that is held by all MSPs equally. And part of what we do at the MSPAlliance is to try to establish standards and enforce and promote and educate for standards of behavior within the MSP space globally. It's a big job. That's largely what we've been doing for 22 years. And seeing that manifest itself in organizations like Security7, now Integris, is really satisfying, because I know that they may not say that, but I know that they are often the only line of defense, the first line defenders between their customers and all the bad actors that are out there wanting to do harm, wanting to profit illegally and creatively, I might add. And that's just such an important role. And so the other fun part of our job is to advocate for MSPs and the work that they do to public policy makers, to insurance organizations, to the banking sector, healthcare sector, and try to tell them why their life is much better off with an MSP, MSSP than without. Yeah, I mentioned, we're 22 years old, almost 23 years in existence, and the membership grew very quickly, but the chief work, Jay mentioned MSP World and doing conferences, which are largely educational conferences for the MSP professional community. And that spawned into the best practices, creating a certification program, and then later doing a lot of just public policy work. We don't pay politicians. We don't dirty our hands and stuff like that, but we'll gladly tell them what we think of regulation. I think, Anthony, you had brought up a comment earlier about regulation. The United Kingdom just passed or is getting ready to pass an MSP regulation update to their NIS 2018 framework on cybersecurity. And so we are definitely seeing regulation come, not just within the MSP and the cybersecurity sector, but this is regulation that is impacting all organizations, large, small, medium-sized. Doesn't matter where you are on the planet. I think both Anthony and Jay did a very good job of explaining that regulation is coming faster and faster. And it is my personal opinion that the stress level of people dealing with regulation and the threat of it is far less when you have a good MSSP partner to talk to and collaborate and strategize with, because that's the difference between going it alone and hoping that you did it right versus having another set of eyes and another brain to just bounce ideas off of and strategize about how to do what needs to be done as quickly and efficiently as possible. This difference between MSP and MSSP, I think maybe Jay, you had said that earlier, that the distinction 20 years ago wouldn't have been very noticeable, but today I think it's very noticeable. You do know who is a good MSP based off of whether or not they're doing MSSP types of work, right? They don't always call themselves an MSSP, but they're doing security and they're doing it right. And all the elements that you've heard from Anthony and Jay, those are some of the characteristics, the traits that you would look for in selecting a good, experienced MSSP for your needs.
So Charles, thank you so much. There's a couple things there, but one of them I wanted to point out is just the need to focus on and what the UK is doing of the regulation of the MSP community, right? Integris itself has helped respond to MSPs being breached and getting them and their clients out of trouble on a regular basis. So Integris Security7 is completely aligned with the mission of the MSPAlliance to keep this going. At the end of the day, I got into this business to protect SMBs. I was on the insurance side, and I hated that the incident happened and then they would, rely on an insurance policy and an insurance carrier to get them out of it or to at least recover. I knew that wasn't the answer. The answer was to get left of bang or before bang, as Jay mentioned, and engage with a correct provider, doing it the right way, holding themselves to a higher standard to make sure these SMBs could survive. Because to me, they're the lifeblood of what America is and running jobs and businesses and all that kind of stuff. And it's rooted in my father's businesses and things like that. So anyway, Integris Security7 completely aligned with the MSPAlliance and holding ourselves accountable to a higher standard. So thank you for all the education and knowledge work that you are doing in that space with your team. We had one more question here, which the team can run in conjunction with us answering some. But obviously, the MSSP side of our house, Security7, the MSP side of our house, Integris, obviously are coming together. We've expanded our service offerings. And if any of you are interested in a follow-up on that, we're more than happy to engage with a conversation. With that, I'm going to switch it over to the chat so I can see Barbara's question here. If the MSP is doing the vulnerability assessment of their own management services, isn't that a conflict of interest? So my quick answer on this is yes, it could definitely be considered that. And I actually look at this in a couple of different lights, Barbara, and for whoever else is here. So you have vulnerability assessments, you have internal and external vulnerability scans. There is even a solution that Integris can put in place, which is continuous vulnerability scanning on a constant basis, very similar to how we currently manage and monitor networks with our standard tool sets. There's another layer we can throw on top of that we can include. Then there's a whole nother level called penetration tests. A little bit different engagement, different use cases, different needs. Most of the organizations, I would say, that need a full-blown or annual penetration test could be a quarterly penetration test. You could be a publicly traded company. We have a lot of those in that Integris. Yes, that is then mandated. Integris even raises our hand and says, we can't do this for you. This needs to be done by another party. In terms of vulnerability assessments and the continuous vulnerability scanning, that is something that we can do, report on under the CISO offering, and then fix and maintain and adjust along the way. So it's really the use case is where I would go. But at the end of the day, Integris, with integrity being the root behind our name, we'll raise our hand and tell you when we can or can't do that. And we'll also, if that is even of a concern, we have multiple third parties that we can introduce. Jay, I'll let you hit that from any angle that you want as well.
Pretty similar, but a little bit different, right? So from the conflict of interest, the straight out question, we haven't seen it as a conflict of interest. And we've done this predominantly from a firewall and a network perspective, not as much from a systems perspective, right? So this is part of the reason why it's better together, because we didn't really offer that patch management services. But to Anthony's point, the line of delineation that we have is when we get into the penetration test. Those are usually provided by a third party. They could be on our paper, but the services are provided by a whole different organization. Now, the vulnerability assessment side of it, again, not too dissimilar to the penetration test, but they're a different tool set. So usually the patching system is going to be different technology than what the vulnerability assessment tool set is going to be. So when you look at how vulnerability assessments tool sets are built, is they go into various databases like a bug track or a CVE, the common vulnerability exploit database, and it's a combination of all these different databases. They will then go after the patching efficacy of some other patching tool. So I think from my perspective, that's not the conflict of interest, but it would be a conflict of interest if you started to engage in a penetration test where you're trying to break into your own handiwork, because it's done beyond just a subscription. It's the subscription and the people that are going to go off and try to do a penetration test, where vulnerability assessments are usually just the subscription with a reporting element. So I hope that clarifies at least our stance on the nuanced difference between vulnerability assessments and then penetration testing.
Yeah. I'm really starting to look at the vulnerability assessments and scans in this continuous scanning model that I've seen now as just as another layer of your stack that you're going to employ on a continuous basis. And then that penetration test, as Jay mentioned, that's third party, that's outside, that's people evaluating other people's work. Charles, anything on that?
Yeah, just I concur with your judgment and stance on that. I would go further to say it would be detrimental to have a third party performing an ongoing vulnerability assessment scan and potentially tripping over the work, and that could create actually more problems. 100% agree on the pen testing. That you can't break into a network that you're protecting, right? It's defeatist logic, right? You wouldn't want to spend that money, but vulnerability scanning, I think, is not only not a conflict, but it's necessary to do and actually very good to do on an ongoing basis.
Right. The part about the penetration test, we've got some clients that even will flip out pen testers year after year, right? So, to get down to the conflict of interest side of it, it's not only that we don't perform them, the same organization doesn't perform them multiple times in a row. You want to get different perspectives at it.
Yep. And Integris is pen tested every single year. We also practice or eat our own dog food in the same vein. With that, it is 2:02 Eastern. We're 2 minutes over time. We maintained a lot of attendees through the end. I appreciate it from myself at Integris, from Jay at Security7, and from Charles from the MSPAlliance. Thank you all for joining us today, and have a great holiday season and a happy new year. Thank you all.